Hey, I'm Terry Peiper, and I'm here today to give you a presentation on the anatomy of the saddle support area. So my goal is to give you the information so that you can look at saddles and you can look at your students' saddles, and hopefully if we save just one horse, just one, from needless suffering and pain, then I've done my job. But if each one of you watching can save one horse, well, then that's a lot of horses, and that is truly my goal in life. So let me just bring up the presentation here. I'm going to share this. And give you a little bit of a background on where I'm coming from. This is my horse, Easy. And basically this all came about because of Easy. I was an instructor for 25, almost 30 years before I learned about the importance of proper saddle fit. And basically, the reason why I started Fit Right Saddle Solutions is because of Easy and because of his kissing spines. So this slide is not his kissing spines. His x-rays were actually worse than this one. But this gives you an example of what kissing spines is. So basically, Easy came to me in 1997. It was at an auction in Lexington, Virginia. I was truly in love at first ride, first 5 minutes. And he was purchased to be a barrel racer. Because of his athletic ability and his long legs and his long stride, he was a great barrel racing prospect. And he did very well basically from the year 2000 until 2005. He won 2 saddles, and until 2006, when he was diagnosed with Boggs-Fabins and ring bone. And the usual recommended treatments for Boggs-Fabins of the hocks is injections, Bute, Adequin, and none of those things worked. And at the same time, we knew that, barrel racing was hard on him. I fess up. And so we started also doing a little bit of very low level dressage, just so that I could ride my horse and enjoy him without him working so hard. But none of the treatments were working. And basically Easy was retired. Because he just wasn't sound. So he did do some pony rides, beginner lessons, but basically he was unsound. Then in November 2009, I heard Jochen Schlese speak at the American Riding Instructors Convention. And basically I felt like his speech, which is a lot of what I'm going to tell you today, I felt like he was spying on us in our lessons. And he started talking about the problems that horses have, and it was like, oh my gosh, we have that problem. And we have problems with riders that can't keep their leg underneath of them, and we have problems with horses that won't round their backs. And so, long story short, he started coming to do saddle fittings in our barn back in Pennsylvania. And in 2010, he came several times because I had an arena where they could meet people. And I just saw literally one miracle after another. I saw horses that were hollow-backed and cranky and stiff become soft and supple and round. And I saw girthy horses that, that were biting when you cinched them up, become happy and calm for saddling and mounting. And I literally saw unsound horses become sound when we changed nothing except for he just changed saddles. And I still note here that Easy was in the pasture, and we never even thought about getting him saddle fitted because he wasn't dependable to be, he wasn't dependable to be sound, to be usable. So why would we look at a saddle for him? So after one whole year of watching literally miracles, some friends suggested that we all go to Florida for more saddle fitting training. And since it was Florida in February, I was like, sure, no brainer. I'm there. So just a few weeks later, I was sitting beside my partner in that class. That day was Jane Savoy. So I was in good company. And Jane was like me. She had no intentions of doing any work with saddles. She just wanted to learn more to help her students. And it was a Thursday, I remember, and the topic was wither clearance and how triggering the nerves and crowding the supraspinalis ligament could cause a horse to hollow his back, rotate his pelvis, and drag his toes. And oh my gosh, the words dragging the toes was like an alarm. I still get chills on my arms thinking about it, because it was like this alarm that went off in my head. I was like, oh my gosh, that's what Easy does. And he did for a really long time. And nobody could ever do anything to fix it. No injection, no medication, no supplement, no special shoeing. And of course, I have the best shoer. So like nothing ever worked to getting Easy drug his toes ever since I can remember. So I couldn't wait to get back home, which was crazy because it was like sunny and 65 in Florida, and it was near 0 in PA, but I still wanted to get home and get him to a veterinarian and see if what I suspected was true. So we went to a vet that didn't know that I had just went through all the saddle fitting training, and he didn't know anything about Easy. I just said, this horse is not sound, and I don't know what's wrong with him. Can you help me out? The long story short, he was diagnosed with kissing spines. His back x-rays looked horrible. But then here's the part that totally still blows me away. The prescribed treatment for him was to ride him lightly in the saddle that was not too long, and to ride him long and low and canter him to warm up. A month later, the next time the saddle fitter came around, Easy got a saddle. And just a couple of months after that, Easy was showing again, and that's the picture in the bottom. So not as a barrel racer. We retired him from barrel racing, and he did do some low-level dressage. And he was sound enough to show, and he was sound enough to show without any drugs. He did not ever need any bute after that. He never was injected. He has his glycosamine, supplement, but he was completely drug-free and sound. And the difference was a saddle that fit. And I just can't, I knew right then and there that this is what I needed to do. I need to spread the word about saddle fit, because there's other people that have their heart horse, and there's a lot of horses that work really hard for us, and people need to know about this. So it's pretty safe to say that I eat, sleep, and breathe saddles. And I will tell anybody that wants to listen how the saddle's supposed to fit. And what I do is I go around and I do saddle fit evaluations and fittings, all different kinds of saddles, because every horse has a saddle support area, and every horse has a front, the middle, and the back, and the thoracic ribs, and the thoracic vertebrae, and the shoulder blade. Every horse has that. It doesn't matter what kind of saddle you put on their back. So, and I have been doing it now since 2011, when I came home from Florida. Totally changed my life. And the information that I've gathered, I've either learned it from working on the horses, or I've read it from the veterinarians and the universities that have gathered this information. I can also tell you that none of this is new. The technology is new, but the rules that we're going to discuss on how the saddle's supposed to fit, and I have a couple of notes here to remind me so that I don't forget any of them. This stuff was all recorded back in 1905 in the Cavalry Handbook. None of this is new. This information just was lost. So to break it down and make it as simple as I can, we're going to talk about the front, the middle, and the back of the saddle support area. Now, the anatomy of the horse is pretty complicated, so I'm going to try and break it down a little bit more. We're going to talk about the bones, we're going to talk about the muscles, and then there's tendons and ligaments that connect all that together. So first is the front of the saddle support area. This area gets a lot of attention because there's a lot going on there. And so we spend way more time in the front because there's so much more going on. There was a time when we used to buy horse feed by nothing but the percentage of protein. It was sweet feed or it was pellets, and the only thing they talked about was at 10% or 12% or 16 or 18% protein, and that's it. But now we have starch and sugar and digestible energy and fiber and digestible fiber. We know way more because of technology, and that's the same thing that's going on with the saddle fit. The days that we rode every horse in the same saddle, those days are over. We are way smarter now because we have technology. So first thing we want to think about in the front of the saddle support area is that we need to have wither clearance. And this is I knew this. I didn't know what I didn't know, but I did know that we needed 3 fingers, approximately 3 fingers on the top of the withers to the top of the saddle, so that we had room for the saddle pad. We had room that when we put our wheat and girth up and put squish the saddle down, that we still had clearance. But what I didn't know is that we also needed room on the sides of the withers. We need room on the sides of the withers because when the horse starts to move, this shoulder blade rotates upwards, backwards into the front of the saddle. It comes right up into this area. We also have the spinal ligament. Well, the supraspinalis ligament, spinal ligament is easier to say. This illustration shows the ligament in blue. It's not blue, it's the color of the stuff you cut off of steaks, but to make it easy, it's blue. And it connects the front of the horse, the pole to the pelvis, basically. It ties in with the nuchal ligament, which is how the horse becomes, how this ligament system is how the horse becomes round. It wraps around the tops of each one of these prostheses, which are the tops of the vertebrae that stick up. So this is what I suspect, going back, knowing what I know now about Easy. Easy had, of course, he had the clearance on the top of his withers, but I don't believe he had the clearance on the sides. So the saddle rubs on the spinal ligament. And the way it was described with me is if you rub on that tendon in your hand and you just rub on it there for a few minutes, it's not going to cause you any great pain. Nobody's running you to the hospital. You'll be able to do your job and write your notes. But if you do that every day for a little bit, by the end of the week or the end of 2 weeks, for sure, your fingers are going to be tingly. You're going to have a hard time holding on to a fork, and your handwriting, if you do it on that hand, is not going to be the best. Well, what it does to a horse is when you rub on the spinal ligament, either in the front because there's not enough room, or anywhere along the sides or in the back because there's not enough room for the spinal ligament, it will show up in the end of the horse's fingertips, which is the toes. And that's what was going on with Easy. Easy would drag his toes. So number one, first and foremost, we need to have this clearance on the sides of the withers and on the top. Now this looks a little extreme in this picture because normally you have a saddle pad in there. So in order for us to have that clearance on the sides of the withers, the tree angle must match the horse's shoulder angle. So if this was the horse's shoulder instead of a saddle stand, this tree angle is matching this tree stand or shoulder angle. And what happens then is the shoulder can go upwards, backwards, underneath the front of the saddle. We know about tree angle because we are all familiar with these different colored gullet plates. These gullet plates are changing the tree angle. Even though they advertise as changing the tree width, they're not actually changing the tree width, they're changing the angle. The width is, like for instance, this saddle, the width is the same. It never changes. It's all there, it's pretty narrow. What you're changing is the angle. It's going like this and like this, but it never changes up here. And the ones on top, they're a little bit wider and they just change the angle, but they're never actually changing the width. The width would be going this way. The Wintec people were pretty quick, not quick. They were the first ones to figure this out. And the Wintec, they have their colors. The black, the blue, the yellow, the white is the widest. And they soon figured out that not every horse was in this. So they went to the purples and they're wider and they go changing the angles within the purples. So the first thing we have to do after we have the wither clearance is we have to make sure that the tree angle matches the shoulder angle. So this picture here was interesting to me. I just took it off. Some of these pictures I just copied off the internet. Some of them came from actual horses that I worked on. If this saddle here, what they call normal angle, was on your horse, and what's very common in the Western saddles is that they pinch here at the top. So whenever we thought, oh, the saddle is pinching, that means we need a wider, because it's pinching. It's pinching, and they always pinch here. They don't pinch here. They always pinch here at the top of the tree. And so when they're pinching, we all thought, well, we need a wider saddle. So we go to the store and we would get a wider. This is what the manufacturers tell us. This is wider. So we go home with our wider tree, and guess what? This pinching at the top is now going to be worse because now this is so much wider. It's not actually touching the horse, and so the pinching got worse. And then, just out of curiosity, with my ruler on my computer screen, I measured the distance between here and here on what they call the normal angle, which is probably your semi-quarter horse bars, is narrower than this one, which is what they're calling the wide angle. So not only did all the support at the bottom go away, causing it to pinch more, but it's even narrower. So we bought ourselves a wider, probably a full quarter horse bars, and that saddle was actually worse than this, what they call the normal angle. So how do you check and see if the angle matches up? Because it's so important. Dr. Robinson here, she's wrote a fabulous book. She's a veterinarian from California. The title of her book is How to Tell If Your Horse is in Pain and What You Can Do About It. And she describes a lot of this in more detail from a veterinarian's point of view. In the Western saddle, she's showing here, this is the shoulder, the horse's shoulder angle. And she's using her hand to show you where it is. And it clearly matches the angle of this Western saddle. And on the English saddle, the tree points are covered in wool. And the tree angle will follow this piping. And it will go the same angle as this piping. So forget about this one that goes under the thigh block and forget about the wool. It squishes out of the way. You actually want to match the angle of this piping. So it's easy to do with, it's easier, I shouldn't say it's easy. If you put a dressage whip or a crop right here and then another one here, these two lines or your two whips need to be parallel, like these two lines, and then you know that those two angles will match. Now, how do you tell if it's wrong? Well, this is the example of a tree that is too narrow at the top or too wide at the bottom. This one is pinching like crazy at the top, and see no clearance, and all the weight is going to be right there. And this picture shows a tree angle. This is easy saddle, and this is easy shoulder. And you can see the space at the top. His shoulder can clearly, when he moves, go upwards, backwards into that spot. Don't worry about whether or not your saddle, your Western saddle, is going over the shoulder, because as soon as the horse takes a step, the shoulder is under the saddle. So really it's going to be matching up the rigging. Western saddles, no Western saddle is going to fit on this horse's back. His saddle support area in his younger day was like 16, 17 inches. And we know all Western saddles are at least 22. So it's going to overlap in the front and it's going to overlap in the back. The key is that it puts the weight in the middle of the saddle support area, which we'll show you another picture. So tree angle is this. Think of the colored gullet plates. Tree width is this: big, wide, fat horse or skinny little race horse. This is the width. So the easiest way, and I want to keep it simple, the easiest way to tell if the saddle is too wide or too narrow is to look at the balance. Nick's saddle here is balanced. This saddle is balanced front to back. If this saddle is too low in the front and popping up in the back, that makes it easy when they pop up in the back. I mean, even with a rear cinch, the saddle is still popping up in the back. There's probably no wither clearance. So again, no wither clearance, too low in the front, popping up in the back. That saddle's too wide. And the other extreme is the saddle in front is too high. If it's too high, it means it's too narrow. It means this tiny little tree is not going down around the horse. It's just sitting up on top. If we don't remember anything from today, the one thing that we cannot fix with a saddle pad is a saddle that's too narrow. It would be very tempting, I know I was there so I can say it, it would be very tempting to put a lollipop or a lifter pad in the back of the saddle, lift it up, balance it out, and go ride. And unfortunately, we still see that. So we need to educate. The reason why the saddle is so high in the front is not because the panels are flocked unevenly. It's because the tree is too narrow. This horse was one of the widest horses I ever worked on. He needed a special wide tree. All that was just the front. We need to have the shoulder angle match the tree angle. We need to have plenty of room around the withers, and we need to have good balance. Now is a good time to talk about the spinal ligament system here. She has it in pink. This is how the horse becomes round or becomes hollow. And this is how we have a lot of problems with SI joints. So now that we can see the picture of the bones and the ligaments painted on the horse, we can see that if this horse were to flex his nose, that it would pull the nuchal ligament upwards. And then what happens is the nuchal ligament is attached to the spinal ligament. So as the nose goes inward, it pulls on the nuchal ligament, and that's what pulls the back up. When the nose goes in and the back goes up, then the hindquarters can come underneath. When we get the rollcur or overflexed in the face, the nose goes in, the nuchal ligament pulls, the supraspinalis pulls, but it can only go so far, and it will tear in the back. And it will tear or be strained, or this is the weak spot, is back here. And this is why we have so many problems with the SI joint. So the middle of the saddle support area is basically the top of the rib heads. This is where the saddle needs to sit. It sits on the top of the rib heads. If it's an English saddle, it sits behind the shoulder and in front of the last rib. It's really not the last rib that's the back of the saddle support area, but the last thoracic vertebrae. Thoracic vertebrae attach to ribs. We have to stay over the thoracic vertebrae because these lumbar vertebrae are literally just, they're higher and they're just sticking out looking for trouble. We'll get to that. The job of the tree is to distribute the weight of the rider over top the rib heads and then make a bridge over top to the other side and distribute the weight on the other side along the top of the rib heads. Now there's muscles intertwined. The psoas muscles go in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And then there's a great big huge long back muscle, the longissimus muscle, and then there's another one underneath. It's a pretty strong tabletop that we sit on. The problem is that not all saddles are distributing the weight on the top of the rib heads. They're putting pressure on that spinal ligament, which can cause the horse to be lame in the back end or hollow their back. It can cause them to have pressure here in the, if it's over the shoulder and pinching the shoulders, it can cause them to trip. It can cause them to be lame front and back. So the reason for the tree is to protect the horse's spinal ligament system. It also is going to support the rider. The tree is going to give support to the rider. So there goes your answers. There's always an answer, always a question about a treeless saddle. The tree is there to protect the horse. So without the tree, then what happens is you don't have any protection and the weight of the rider is going right on the spinal ligament. The treeless people know that, and they have started improving their saddle designs. And what they've done is they've come up with panels and special pads and things like that to distribute weight, which is great. It protects the spinal ligament. It distributes the weight, but that is a treat. So all the benefits of having, if there's a benefit of not having a tree, it's there's nothing there to hurt the horse. But if it is rigid enough to protect the horse and distribute the weight, it's a tree. So it needs to follow the rules of a tree fitting. This picture here just shows our typical old style English saddles with narrow channels. There's no horse. There's a filing cabinet in the back of my office. The top 3 drawers are full, literally of thousands of saddle fit evaluations of horses that I've measured. Some horses several times as their saddle needed to be fitted over the years. No horse is 2 fingers wide. If you put your fingers in the channel of the saddle like this, and it's only 2 fingers wide, it is too narrow. No horse is that narrow in their spinal ligament. Most horses are 4 fingers. A few are 3, some are 5, but most are 4. So when you pick up that saddle and put your hand in there, if it's not at least 4, just put it down because it's not going to fit. It's going to, when you start riding, it's going to put pressure on that spinal ligament system. And worst thing to do is to put a saddle pad in there and take up all the space that you have. There's not much room there. And filling it in with a saddle pad just makes it worse. A lot of times our Western saddles, the problem is the saddle pad. We use pads that are way too thick sometimes. If the saddle's wide enough and the angle matches, big thick pad. For our roping horses and our heavier riders, they provide protection and shock absorption. But if the saddle's not wide enough or you're trying to fix a problem with a big thick pad, is the wrong way to go. It's not going to happen. This picture shows the classical, this is classic, when any pressure is put on that spinal ligament. You can take your fingers and run them down there. Some are more sensitive than others, but if you run your fingers along the horse's spinal ligament, I always think of it as when you hit your funny bone. It's very uncomfortable and they will hollow away. So what happens when they hollow away is their head goes up. And when their head goes up, their pelvis rocks and their back legs will then be out behind. What happens when the horse's back legs are out behind is that now the joints are not lining up the way they're supposed to, and that will cause arthritis. This will cause bog spasms and arthritis, not to mention, of course, the back pain. What we want, of course, is that when the horse steps off, his belly lifts his back for his back foot to come up. This happens automatically. The only reason they would go the other way is if there was pressure up here. If they're walking around eating grass, their head goes down, their back goes up, and they can clearly always step right up underneath themselves. So this is an example of a saddle that has a channel width that's wide enough that it won't put any pressure on the tops of the prosthesis or rub on the ligament. And this is, again, an example of what it looks like with the saddle, with the pad, the clearance that you need. Now let's say, for instance, all that looks beautiful. We've got the wither clearance, we've got the angles matching up, we've got the channels wide enough. I hate to burst your bubble, but in the middle of the saddle support area also is the girth. The rigging or the billets for the girth have to be in the horse's girth groove. This saddle, although it's a little bit long here, is too far back. So everything could be wonderful, but when we girth this up, by the time we get to the mounting block, it's going to be sucked forward up over the horse's shoulder. And that tree point will damage the cartilage to the shoulder. So even though it all looks wonderful, we still need to ride to get a good feel of whether or not it's going to work. And I'll show you then what to look for when you ride. So in the back of the saddle support area, again, we talked about the lumbar vertebrae. These are just sticking out there looking for trouble. They do not have the ribs underneath of them for support. So if we put weight on the lumbar, not only do the horses not like it, but they will tighten the horses subconsciously. Their muscles will tighten to protect these bones. So how much fun is it to ride a horse with a tight back? Not only is it not fun, because a horse that with a tight back is 3/4 of the way spooking because they tighten before they bolt. The other thing that happens is their own muscles can and do cause their horses to need chiropractic adjustments. They knock themselves out of whack with their tight muscles. And the body worker and chiropractors and those massage people, they come along and they push Control-Alt-Delete, basically, and allow the horse to straighten out. But if we go and we put the same saddle back on again, then we are going to need the chiropractor back again. And it won't go away. We'll just have to keep doing the treatments. Also, with the back of the saddle support area, we still have that ligament. So it goes all the way back to the pelvis. So we need to make sure that it's wide enough and that when we're riding, the saddle stays in the middle. So the saddle has to sit straight on the horse, not rub in the back over the spinal ligament. The other thing that we have is the gluteus muscles. Shown here, it's just a coincidence. So one of the gluteus muscles up on top, that sucker comes forward and it ends right in the back of the saddle support area. Well, you know what the job of that gluteus muscle is? It's to extend the hip. So this is my theory. You know where the bucking strap goes? It goes right there. Tight on the gluteus muscle. What do they want the horses to do? They want them to buck. So we don't want to have the saddle back there putting pressure or triggering the nerve that tells the gluteus muscle to extend the hip. Bad. We do not want. So I have seen many times saddles that are too long cause horses to buck. Shorter saddle, horse doesn't have a bucking problem. One of the hardest things for me to accept and is cruelty to horses. I love horses, and when I think something's cruel, it's really hard for me. I have a hard time doing watching some certain types of horse shows. I have a hard time with some, like public trail rides. I just have a hard time with cruelty to horses. And I think that where knowledge stops, cruelty starts. And I think that some of us, and I was there too, some of us were taught that when a horse bucks with the saddle on, that you lunge them, or they would chase them around a round pen until they stop bucking. And how horrible is it to punish a horse that cannot? It's not a conscious thing to when that gluteus muscle is triggered. It is a reflex. They can't control it. So what happens is the horse bucks and bucks and bucks, or is cold back or crow hops or whatever, until they kick that saddle forward off of that spot. And then they're like, okay, now they don't buck anymore. The problem is then the saddle is up over the shoulder, and there's no built-in self-preservation in the front to get the saddle off the shoulder. Unless the girth is giving enough that the shoulder can kick it off, but then sometimes the girth pulls it forward, or the horse will buck or crow hop and push it forward. And the constant movement of the saddle going back and then being pulled forward by the girth, by the way, that's what causes the girth sores. So a lot of times the problem with the girth is really not the problem with the girth. It's really a problem that the saddle doesn't fit. I included these pictures because, of course, the Western saddle does not fit. This saddle is not going to end at the last thoracic vertebrae and keep the pressure off the spinal ligament. What has to happen is the saddle tree, the Western saddle, has to distribute the weight over the ribs and flare in the back and flare in the front. So yeah, it's going over the lumbar a little bit, but it doesn't actually put pressure on it. This is why a saddle that is hollow in the middle is so much damage, because if it's hollow here, then the pressure is in the front of the shoulder and over the lumbar where it's not supposed to be. Most of your jump saddles flare up a little bit in the back, so when you ride, you'll see that even though they seem a little bit longer, they're not actually putting pressure back there. Your dressage saddles will be short enough and have to be short enough to fit in that space. This is what it looks like when you have when you ride with a saddle that puts the pressure evenly behind the shoulder and in front of the last rib. This little sweat running down here. This is running right off of the fly shaker muscle, which also runs pretty much right in line with the last rib, because the horse, this is the area that the horse can't bite easily. So there's a muscle there that shakes off the flies. This is an example. This is what it looks like from the back, and this is what it needs to look like. There's pressure here on each side and clearly stayed off the spinal ligament. The X's over the sweat just means don't look at the sweat. You can't tell anything by sweat. This is a big dry area. If she would have rode longer, this would have all been wet. This was our baby horse on a really, really, really hot day, and she's just sweating because it was hot. It doesn't mean the saddle fit or didn't fit. It just means she was sweating because it was hot. So we'll start our review. I know I went through that really quickly. I hope you took notes. The front of the saddle support area, we need to look at the tree angle. The tree angle needs to match the shoulder angle. Again, you take 2 sticks or crops and lay one on the shoulder and then match it up with the front of the saddle. They need to be parallel. To determine if the tree width is correct, just look at the balance of the saddle. That's the easy way. And clearance, we know 3 fingers on the top and 2 to 3 on the side. Now the rule is not 3. The rule is clearance. If we have a high wither or narrow wither horse, it might be 2. As long as it's 2 and it's clearance with the rider, with the pad and the girth, after you rode around for a few minutes, okay, 2 is enough. If the horse is mutton wither, depending on the shape of the saddle, it might be 5. If everything else is good, the balance is good, 5 fingers is fine. It's clearance. So, but generally, it usually works out to be about 3. In the middle of the saddle support area, the saddle needs to evenly contact the horse's back over top of the rib heads. And you can check this with your hand or just ride for a few minutes without a saddle pad and see how the hair is squished. Then we want to make sure that we didn't talk about this, but get on a stool right behind the horse with the without the girth. Put the saddle on the horse. It needs to sit there straight. You'd be surprised at how many don't sit straight right from the start. An asymmetrical horse with a symmetrical saddle that is not adjustable will need to have some help with some shimming. You can help an asymmetrical horse with some shimming as long as the length is good and the angle is good. You can help an asymmetrical horse with some shimming, and you can help a hollow saddle with some shimming. We want to make sure that channel width, if it's an English saddle, between the two panels, the Western saddle, it doesn't put pressure all the way down from front to back so that there's no pressure on the spinal ligament system. And of course, the back of the saddle, this is very controversial. Some people do not believe that the saddle should not go in the lumbar. All I'm going to say is that there's a filing cabinet in the back of my office, thousands of evaluations. I am here to tell you, and I can prove it over and over and over again. Horses, especially girls, do not like pressure in their lumbar. If you want your horse to be happy, not buck, lift up his back, not drag his toes, move pretty, jump pretty, and stay healthy and sound, keep the pressure off of his lumbar. If you don't care, then the pressure in the lumbar isn't going to make any difference to you. I hope that I gave you enough information to look at your saddles. I know you can't fix them from this video, but I hope that you learned enough to realize when you're looking at your saddles if there's a problem or not. Or what is even better, and I love this, if you're with someone and you don't think their saddle looks good and you go, hey, I don't know too much, but I think you better look into your saddle fit. That might be the reason why your horse is misbehaving. That might be the reason why, he's unsound or we have an undiagnosed lameness. Saddle fit really does make a difference. And when you start experimenting and testing different saddles and seeing, you cannot go back and pretend you don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And boy, when you find out about saddle fit and what helps the horse, you can't pretend. You can't go back. So thank you again for giving me your time and for caring about the horse and for helping me help the horses. I am available always to help. My email is terry@fitratesaddlesolutions.com, and there's my number, and you are welcome to call. And I wish you very many happy, comfy rides together. Thank you.